classic Battlefront 2's story campaign is one of the most beloved bits of the Star Wars expanded universe, especially for Clone Wars fans, as it was centered around the story of the 501st Legion. Aside from the Geonosis prologue, it supposedly all takes place during the last few days of the Clone Wars, though the order of the missions is definitely wrong, as it doesn't fit at all in the timeline of that period. One of the things that makes the Journal of the 501st such a great bit of the expanded universe is that it puts the darker elements of being a clone trooper right out in the open, and in this video, we'll be looking at just that.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
This video is brought to you by NordVPN. I've actually been using Nord for the past year and a half, and the value they provide for my internet privacy is second to none. Through their super fast servers in over 61 countries, you're able to connect to any country's IP with the click of a button. And I can't tell you how important that is for a guy like me in Australia, where so many things are blocked by country-specific firewalls. And talking about firewalls, with NordVPN, it even works in China and bypasses the Great China Firewall. And last but not least, it's not only for computers and laptops, it also has Android and iOS apps to secure your mobile browsing experience. So what are you waiting for? Get the only VPN that's got a perfect score from PC Mag and protect your data today using nordvpn.com/Geetsly to get 70% off a 3-year plan, which is equivalent to only $3.50 per month. Plus, you guys can use my code to get an extra month of NordVPN for free. That's nordvpn.com/Geetsly.
My first day as a member of the 501st. It was hot, it was sandy, chaotic. Nothing at all like the simulations on Camino. Of course, that's pretty much the way it was for all of us, wasn't it? All that breeding, all those years of training. It doesn't really prepare you for all the screaming or the blood, does it? Frankly, I'm still amazed we ever made it through the first hour. Never mind the first day. Incredibly, the 501st survived the crucible of Geonosis, emerging battle-hardened and ready for whatever the war would throw at us.
The first Battle of Geonosis was the first time the clone troopers of the 501st experienced genuine combat, and as the journal said, no simulations could have prepared them for it. The clones may have performed like experts in Attack of the Clones, but this was a facade that concealed their mental states. The Kaminoan simulations, even the harder ones that were intended to simulate the most chaotic of battles, all had some sort of order to them, and nobody actually died. Neither was true for Geonosis. The battle was pure chaos, and it was also a bloodbath. A bloodbath the 501st was indeed lucky to survive.
In the waning months of the Clone Wars, the 501st faced missions critical to the agenda of Chancellor Palpatine. When we arrived at the bombed-out ruins of Megiddo, our Jedi commander believed we had been sent to take out a droid energy collector. What Ki-Adi-Mundi didn't know, however, was that our unit of the 501st was really after an experimental Megiddan power source that the Chancellor wanted for his super laser. Keeping Mundi in the dark wasn't easy. The Jedi had become increasingly wary of the Chancellor's doings, and were on the lookout for the slightest hint of treachery. Just like the rest of them, though, he never caught whiff of what was really going on until it was far too late. The success of the mission on Megiddo was something of a revelation for the men of the 501st. Suddenly, we realized that the Jedi could be fooled. And if they could be fooled, they could be killed.
The 501st's Megiddo mission highlights something that the 501st probably figured out much earlier in the war, a revelation that all clones had to contend with sooner or later. The Jedi weren't invincible. They all made mistakes, they could be killed, and as the Megiddo mission showed, they could be fooled. To a degree, this eroded the trust the clones had for their Jedi generals, as in their view, by not wearing armor or any sort of protection and charging right into the battle, The Jedi were acting as if they were invincible, a foolishness that some started to resent them for.
As the Clone Wars progressed, more and more ground-based legions found themselves pressed into space combat, including the fighting forces of the 501st. For months, every hour of our downtime was spent in the simulator, preparing for the time we would face our enemies from the cockpit of a 170. Finally, the day came to earn our wings. The CIS had staged a daring kidnapping of Chancellor Palpatine and was being escorted from Coruscant by a fleet of separatist ships. With only a few veteran pilots on planet, many of the 501st were pressed into service to drive off the Seps and buy time for a pair of Jedi Knights to rescue the Chancellor. After disabling the final capital ship, General Kenobi and Skywalker took advantage of the opportunity we'd created and rescued the Chancellor. Took all the credit too.
The Battle of Coruscant highlights two aspects of the Clone Wars that weren't much talked about elsewhere: the Republic pilot shortage and a lack of proper credit. A dire lack of clone pilots led to cross-training for ground units, as we discussed in a video earlier this year, which meant that they got even less time to rest than normal, a sacrifice they had no choice but to make. Furthermore, it also highlights how the accomplishments of clones and other lower-ranking soldiers, no matter how important, often get greatly overshadowed by the work of Jedi stars like Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi, which isn't really mentioned much, even though it clearly happened all the time.
It's been said that the 501st got the best of the war. We also got the worst. On Felucia, the Seps dug their metal heels into the muck of that alien hellhole and dared the Republic to come in after them. So we did, only to be met with the month after month of flesh-eating diseases, shrieking nocturnal predators, and other sights that haunt me to this day. Cut off and, for all we knew, abandoned by our superiors. Our only hope was Aayla Secura, our Jedi commander. Without her iron will, none of us would have come out of that mess with our sanity or our lives. When her death came, I hope it was quick. She earned that much. When the 501st was finally rotated out of Felucia, Aayla Secura made a point of seeing us off personally, calling us the bravest soldiers she had ever seen. It's a good thing we were wearing helmets, because none of us could bear to look her in the eye.
We've discussed why the Battle of Felucia was such a hellhole in another video this year, and the problems that plagued the 501st mission there were huge issues for the Grand Army and many other battles as well. Poor reconnaissance and improper environmental training and preparation can doom entire invasions, and it was only thanks to the skill of the 501st and Aayla Secura's sheer force of will that the Republic wasn't repulsed from Felucia yet again when they invaded it this one last time.
When the Separatists' invasion of Kashyyyk caught the Republic flat-footed, a detachment of the 501st was sent in to stop the bleeding until reinforcements could arrive. It was a textbook suicide mission, and we knew it. As we fought our way into Kashyyyk's atmosphere, most of us believed that the only way we'd be getting off this planet was in a body bag. As the 501st finally broke through the Sep blockade over Kashyyyk, I took a long look back at the battle that continued to rage over the planet and wondered why so many had to die for a bunch of walking carpets. Then I followed my orders and turned planetward.
The Republic's attack on the separatist blockade of Kashyyyk was rightfully termed a suicide mission in the Journal of the 501st, and it was far from the only suicide mission clones were sent in. Suicide missions, of course, are simply part of war, an uncomfortable inevitability. What makes them different for the Clone Wars is that they were taken a lot more lightly by the Republic commanders than they usually would be, because, of course, the clones were clones, which many commanders viewed as little more than living droids. Clones were constantly sent on suicide missions, and Kashyyyk was no exception.
When we arrived on Kashyyyk, things were just as bad as we feared. The droids had us outgunned, outmaneuvered, and outmanned by a 5-to-1 margin. What none of us had counted on was the Wookiees. We'd all heard the stories, of course, but we'd never fought next to them. Never seen them rip apart a droid with their bare hands. They were magnificent. Even so, it was still a suicide mission. At least it was until Master Yoda arrived. Then it became a battle. A winnable battle. With the timely arrival of Master Yoda, the 501st was able to hold the line against the Seps on Kashyyyk. We left as heroes. Years later, we'd return as conquerors.
The ground battle on Kashyyyk illustrated another common plight the clones faced: ridiculous odds. Being outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and outgunned by a 5-to-1 margin was unfortunately very common for the Grand Army of the Republic, as the droid army had an overwhelming numbers advantage. As a result, the clones were frequently forced to rely on the native forces like the Wookiees in the case of Kashyyyk, and the Jedi, whose combat skills often proved the worth of whole companies of clones.
In our bones, we knew the war was almost over. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see which side would make the final, daring move. As fortune would have it, the Republic moved first. After the Chancellor informed the Jedi Council that General Grievous and the Sepp leaders were hiding on Utapau, General Kenobi gathered an army large enough to capture 3 star systems. When the orders reached the 501st, our morale soared. For better or worse, this would be the beginning of the end. With the death of General Grievous at the hands of General Kenobi, the Utapau raid had broken the back of the Separatists. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a time for celebration. But our next orders put paid to those thoughts.
The Battle of Coruscant was a massive blow to the CIS, and it came with a massive bit of aid for the Republic. Millions of Spar-type clone troopers were added to the ranks of the GAR, swelling clone numbers. Because of this, the Republic was finally able to overcome the Confederacy's numbers advantage in the last days of the war, throwing the full force of the newly strengthened Republic army against all of the Confederacy's remaining strongholds at once. Utapau was no exception, and the statement that Kenobi brought an army there large enough to take 3 whole systems was no exaggeration. This sort of scenario, playing out on a galactic scale, was what truly crushed the Confederacy, costing them dozens of crucial worlds in a matter of days.
What I remember about the rise of the Empire is how quiet it was. During the waning hours of the Clone Wars, the 501st Legion was discreetly transferred back to Coruscant. It was a silent trip. We all knew what was about to happen, what we're about to do. Did we have any doubts? Any private, traitorous thoughts? Perhaps, but no one said a word. Not on the flight to Coruscant, not when Order 66 came down, and not when we marched into the Jedi Temple. Not a word. Palpatine's rise to power was complete. In recognition of our service and loyalty to the Emperor, the 501st were placed under the direct command of Lord Vader. Armed with deadly new weapons, blazing new ships, and shiny new armor, our presence let the galaxy know that the days of the old Republic were well and truly over. We were establishing a new era, an era of order and peace.
No part of the 501st Journal illustrates the dark part of a clone's life more than Operation Nightfall. Though there were plenty of clones that were perfectly happy to gun down Jedi, there were clones that, even with inhibitor chips, had personal qualms against the attack on the Jedi Temple. But it wasn't the first time they had qualms with the mission. It's a fair bet that all clones, at least once, had some doubt or other about any given campaign. But at the Jedi Temple, they did exactly what they'd done all those other times. They said nothing and they followed their orders. So that was our analysis of the darker parts of the Clone Wars as illustrated by the Journal of the 501st. But what do you think? Should we do a second part to this for the Galactic Civil War era 501st? Feel free to post your thoughts in the comments section below. And just before you go guys, you've heard it before, if you can go check out all those links in the description below to join the Discords, our Geetsly's gaming network, and in general just to interact and play games with other Star Wars fans such as yourself. We're currently working really hard on both the Gmod servers and the Roblox servers, and I'd really appreciate it if you check those out if you're into those games. And if you're into history, don't forget that I also have a second history channel that I post niche World War II content to, so if that's up your alley, then you'll want to check that out as well. So once again, these are all in the description below guys, and as always, thank you so much for watching and I hope to see you in the next video.